This is college football in 2030. So I've been talking about doing this video for a couple days now, and I wanted to wait for the CFP rankings to really solidify what I was thinking here, because there's a few things that I'm looking at with this current year and how things have shaken out that have made me kind of change my opinion on what the future of college football is going to look like. Let's get started with the ACC. I think it'll look like this: Virginia, UNC, Duke, NC State, Wake Forest, Maryland, Boston College, and Georgia Tech. This is a much smaller conference than what they currently have, which is 17 teams, 18 if you include Notre Dame and all sports outside of football. And I just think that the ACC is the most obvious example of conference bloat in the realignment era, and it just has to come to a head. I think about the Big East at the end there. I think about the 7 teams, the Catholic 7, that decided to break off and just be a basketball conference or a non-football sponsoring conference, not just basketball, but a non-football sponsoring conference, and move away from the teams that they brought in to survive as a football conference, and had kind of ruined the conference identity at that point. I look at the ACC like that right now. They kind of ruined their conference identity through multiple cycles of realignment, trying to expand the college football side of things. And I don't think that it has panned out in the way that they would have wanted it to, because the teams that they've brought in, Florida State, Miami, haven't succeeded in Miami's case, or want out in Florida State's case. And their core member, their founding member, Clemson, who has been successful in college football, also wants out, just like Florida State, because of how they've expanded and the amount of filler teams they have in their conference currently. So I think that this is a lot of their core teams that were our core schools that were founding members, outside of Boston College and Georgia Tech, were not founding members in this group here. And of course, they lose Clemson and South Carolina. South Carolina is long gone, and I think Clemson is on its way out as soon as it gets to the exit fee that they like, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think that they're going to try to get back to their identity, which is basketball conference in sports and a high-level academic conference that is focused around Atlantic Coast teams. Cal and Stanford fit the high-level academic conference, but there's no way they can continue to be in the ACC for the next 10, 20, 30 years with how many sports these high-level institutions sponsor. They cannot travel across the country for women's volleyball every single week. They cannot ask the Olympic sports, at which they have 20, 30, 40 of them. They cannot ask the schools to continue to sponsor those sports and travel across the country. And you cannot get rid of those sports if you want to remain a high-level institution that brings in high-level applicants. So I think that Cal and Stanford are going to have to cut bait in that way with the ACC, although I think there still will be some close ties with the higher-level institutions on the academic side. I don't think that they can continue to be in the same conference athletically. Boston College is a school that moved over in 2005 from the Big East, and I think that they fit that high-level academic Atlantic kind of vibe that I think will be the future of the ACC. And Georgia Tech also is that high-level academic, and I don't think they're going to the SEC. I think that they fit in the ACC, and they would be kind of the linchpin of the college football side of things. Them, Virginia, if they can keep this momentum up, and then hopefully some of these North Carolina schools can figure it out, like their investment would show that they should. And there's really 3 parts to this split. The second part is the old Big East. I don't really have a great name for this, but that's essentially what this is. And it looks like Syracuse, Louisville, Pitt, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, Cincinnati, Memphis, Tulane, Rutgers, UCF, and James Madison. Now, this is where that private equity or new college football money idea really comes through, because I think that a lot of these schools will maybe miss ads in the ACC realignment story just because they haven't had the success on the college football side that they would have wanted. Of course, Syracuse and obviously Louisville have been very successful in college basketball. Those would be the hardest ones to pry away, but I do think that Louisville kind of fits in the ACC, kind of doesn't. Pitt is in that same boat. Syracuse maybe stays. I'm not sure about that one. They do fit the ACC more than the other two, but I think that they would want to stick. If there was an opportunity to have this kind of a conference, they would want to go with them. And then, of course, Virginia Tech, I think, would be the value keep on the college football side, because James Franklin is going to turn that program into a perennial top 25 program at the very least. But I think that Virginia Tech does not fit the academic side. And that's the same thing with Louisville and Pitt. They just don't fit the academic side of the ACC. So that's where I think that they will move off of this. And they're going to kind of try to reinstitute some form of the Big East Conference USA in a more Appalachia focused, Northern Appalachia focused form. That kind of is built around the Louisville, Pitt, West Virginia, Cincinnati kind of area. Virginia Tech fits into that as well. Syracuse, of course, fits into that. I think those are the teams that are going to be the value add there. James Madison is the team that's on the rise. They have been very, very successful, rising up to FBS in what I think 2021. It was one of the more recent teams that have moved up, and I think that they are set to be in the kind of second tier, not a power conference, but the tiers, the American, Mountain West, what this old Big East would be, maybe slightly above those other tiers. The Pac-12, or what they're trying to build with the Pac-12 currently. I think James Madison will belong in that tier with the investment that they're putting in, with the success that they're having. And they could very well, the Virginia area could very well be on the way up in college football. The new money part of this is I think that this is going to be a venture with a new media partner, whether that's Prime from Amazon, whether that's Netflix, whether Turner, like TBS, TNT, decides to put more money in college football as they have pivoted away from the NBA, whether it's the Saudis who have been buying every single media partner up. That would be the path for this to happen. I think that there has to be someone that sees this as a money-making venture to put these other schools together where they might not be able to survive if they were just going together by themselves and then going to look for a partner. I think this would have to be somebody being like, let's put this conference together and pull apart from the ACC. Because again, I think that the ACC is a sinking ship, and there's a path for the exit for these teams in the near future. And we learned about that path from Florida State and Clemson suing the conference, trying to get out of their deals with the conference. And this is where I think there's a big change in the future of college football, because I think Florida State and Clemson are going to go independent along with a few other teams. So Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, Texas, and Oklahoma, I all believe will be independent or pseudo-independent come the 2031 season. And why I say 2031 is because Clemson and Florida State were suing for some kind of clarity, or really just trying to get out of the conference. They sued the ACC, and they settled with an understanding that the exit fee structure would be kind of set in stone. And this is what it currently looks like. Right now, teams would have to pay $165 million to get out of their deal with the ACC. That is a lot of money, even for a high-level program like Florida State, who has the boosters to pay that. That's a lot of money, especially if you don't know what's on the other side. And like I talked about yesterday, a lot of those teams leaving might get an Oregon-Washington deal where they're not getting full media rights for conferences that are currently in a deal. The Big Ten's deal comes up in 2029, 2030, so you might start to see some of these teams like Clemson, like Florida State, maybe Miami, try to leave around 2028, 2029. Then you're looking at about $111 million to get out of the conference. But I don't know that Florida State or Clemson or Miami are really on the Big Ten's radar with how things have gone. I think that their focus should more be on getting 4 college football playoff teams every single season. And there will be some changes to college football playoff, which we'll talk about as well. But I don't know that adding Clemson or Miami helps that. I think that it hurts that, because you add another quality team that's not top-level quality, like Oregon, like Ohio State, like Indiana has been, Penn State should be, Michigan should be. There's USC could be in some future that they actually make a recruit better when they get there, instead of just taking on a good recruit and having them be in obscurity. That Florida State and Miami haven't proven to be consistently great, but they have been consistently winning some games. So I don't know that they want another Nebraska, they want another Iowa, they want another Washington, who's just a team that you're going to stub your toe on, instead of a team that's going to actually provide top-level college football playoff production. So that's why I said 2031 is probably where these schools are leaving, and that's kind of what we're looking at here, because that's when it gets to $75 million for an exit fee from the ACC. 2031 through 2036, there's $75 million to exit. That is more reasonable, and I really think that Florida State in particular could afford that and could go get good money as an independent. And I think that they're kind of quasi-independents here. That's why we have 6 teams coming out. Well, 6, 5 plus Notre Dame, because in any other sport, including basketball, which is the other really important sport, you need 6 teams to produce a conference champion. 6 teams sponsoring any sport. And I think that these 6 teams, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, Texas, Oklahoma, all could survive as independents that maybe schedule a few of each other, but also have, go off and do the Notre Dame thing while still surviving the other sports if they have these 6 teams. And I think that the path is made clear by Notre Dame. If you are competitive in a couple big games or win 1 or 2 big games, it doesn't matter what else you have on your schedule. In the college football playoff era, these teams have big enough brands that if they're 10-2 at the end of the season, it really doesn't matter who you've played. You will be in the college football playoff. As the college football playoff expands, which I would expect, and I think everyone expects to have happen at the end of the season, that becomes even more easy because I don't think there's going to be that much baking in of this conference has this many spots, this conference has this many spots. I just don't see that really being the thing because it limits the top conferences. It would be good for the ACC, good for the Big 12, in some ways good for the Big 10 and the SEC, but the SEC is going to have 5 teams in this year. The Big 10 had 4 teams in last year. I don't think that they're going to want to limit themselves to only having 4, only having 5. They're going to want to say, there are 7 at-large spots available. I think our conference can get all of them. And that's what they want to do. They're going to expand the at-large spots and use the apparatus they've already built, especially in the SEC's case, to push those teams in there. Teams like Texas and Oklahoma do not have the year-in, year-out success in the SEC as evidenced by Texas losing to Florida this year. They're going to stub their toe in those games, and they're not going to benefit from that as much. They are going to benefit from playing each other, Texas and Oklahoma, playing maybe one other big game like this Ohio State game that Steve Sarkisian is saying, we scored 7 points against Ohio State, so we should be in the college football playoff. Those games get you in the college football playoff if you then go and pack your team with UTEP and Nevada and whoever else you can find to put on your schedule that has a pulse, but not a good one. That's the path for these blue blood schools, which all of these ones are. Maybe Clemson, not as much, and they're the school that might not survive in this quite as well, but I still think that Clemson wants out of the ACC, and there's not a home for Clemson in the SEC, probably not a home for Clemson in the Big 10. They're not leaving the ACC to go to the Big 12, so Clemson is kind of stuck here, and I think that they would go along if Florida State and Miami had a place for them to sit. Every one of these schools here has been or would want to be independent at some point, and I think that the college football playoff is saying, yeah, you can do that. We don't care so much about resume. We care more about resume combined with the logo that you have and how many viewers you're going to bring to our games, and as we expand the college football playoff, I think that becomes more and more true, and these are teams that would be positioned to benefit from being an independent more than anyone else. That takes us to the SEC, and it is just the old school SEC before Texas and Oklahoma joined. So we're looking at Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, LSU, Arkansas, Missouri, and Texas A&M. I don't think anyone's leaving the SEC unless they have to. I don't see the SEC kicking any other teams out. They don't really have super weak programs. Maybe Arkansas, maybe Vanderbilt, but Vanderbilt just flipped the best quarterback in the country for 2026, taken away from Georgia. So Vanderbilt is definitely on the rise. It's not just a Pavia thing. It's a Clark Lee thing more than anything. Arkansas is going to be there. They're not going to kick them out. So I think the SEC stays intact outside of Oklahoma and Texas leaving. And that's just because Texas is greedy and Oklahoma will do whatever Texas does because that's their meal ticket is being tied to Texas more than anything else. Next, the Big Ten, and it's going to be similar. It's the Big Ten minus Maryland and Rutgers. So we've got Washington, Oregon, USC, UCLA, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Illinois, Indiana, Purdue, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State. We talked a bit about private equity, and I do think that there's a chance that maybe Michigan or USC would join in the independent revolution that we're going to see, I think, towards the end of this decade, the start of the next decade. But at the end of the day, the money's going to be too good in the Big Ten. Yes, the media rights, and at the end of 29. But there's going to be a bigger deal. The Big Ten knows how to make money. The private equity might or might not be there. Either way, this next media deal is going to explode because now they do have Oregon. Now they do have USC. Now they do have Washington that add just more to this already very valuable conference that first and foremost has Ohio State and Michigan play every single season. And they're going to find a way to continue to improve their scheduling, especially if they can find a way to get rid of Maryland and Rutgers. The Pac-12 is very interesting as well. I think it's going to look like this: Oregon State, Washington State, Boise State, Utah State, San Diego State, Texas State, Colorado State, Fresno State, North Texas, Cal, and Stanford. The biggest pushback obviously comes from Cal and Stanford, but hear me out. Cal and Stanford cannot be traveling across the country for all of these different sports that they sponsor, like I've pointed out multiple different times. And I think at the end of the day, the Pac-12 is not that interesting of a football conference. I mean, Washington State obviously is pretty good. Boise State is the big cheese in the conference. Texas State is interesting as a growing program. Some of these schools, Fresno State has obviously had some success back in the day in the early 2000s, but they're not that interesting of a college football conference. But I think when you look at basketball and you look at the other sports, Oregon State is one of the best baseball programs in the country. Gonzaga, of course, being in the Pac-12 as a basketball program, I think that's underrated for what that means to the conference. Yes, they're not a football program, and yes, football is where the money is made. But also, there are conferences that are successful outside of football that are, good conferences. Look at the Big East. The Big East has a ton of success in basketball, and that's enough to carry the whole conference. These are not Ohio State, Texas, Florida programs that are top level in everything. They're smaller schools. Cal and Stanford are not necessarily smaller schools, but they are schools that have different goals than just being the biggest athletic programs in the country. And I think that the Pac-12 is a good landing spot for Cal and Stanford because they will be able to play those other sports and still be top level in those other sports with some of the other successful programs they have here, especially in the basketball, women's basketball side. Maybe they don't go in there because they don't love the academics of the rest of the conference, but I don't really know where else is a home for Cal and Stanford. Stanford could go completely independent and maybe get a tie-in with the Big Ten for a lot of its sports, because I think the Stanford would be a good get for a Big Ten and a lot of other sports outside of football. Maybe that's where they go. Maybe Cal and Stanford find a home in the Big Ten if you take away Maryland and Rutgers and you slide in Cal and Stanford. Maybe that's the route that they decide to go, kind of restructure a little bit more on the West Coast because they have so many teams over there. Maybe Tosh Lapoy can bring Cal up in some way in the football side to get them into that. But I really think that they have a home in the Pac-12 here. I think North Texas is the other ad here. North Texas has been successful. Pac-12 is going to want to expand its Texas footprint, and I think that's the next program that they would go after. I toyed with SMU coming with Cal and Stanford, but I don't think that SMU wants to join the Pac-12 because they are football focused. And finally, that brings us to the Big 12. It's going to look like this: BYU, Utah, Houston, Arizona, Arizona State, Iowa State, Kansas State, TCU, Baylor, SMU, Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma State, and Texas Tech. The most interesting team here is Texas Tech. It's really hard to predict what they're going to do. Do they take the approach of, we're going to be the best team in the Big 12 year in and year out if we continue to invest the way that we have been, and that is going to be enough, because Texas Tech has been on the tip of everyone's tongue this entire season, and that's what you need to be a successful program. Winning games and people caring about you winning games, that can carry the Big 12 into a new realm. And I previously thought that the Big 12 would not be plucked because they didn't have any programs that anybody wanted. I think Texas Tech is a valuable program, but I think that they're more valuable to the Big 12 and in the Big 12 than they are anywhere else. And that is what they're going to base their future on, is we're going to be the best team in the Big 12. And that's enough, because the Big 12 is a power program. The Big 12 is a power conference. Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, Arizona, all in the top 25. Houston's in the top 25 as well. They've had a few teams in and out with Arizona State, Iowa State, Kansas State. I think TCU has even made a appearance there. Maybe Colorado can figure something out. It's been a really rough year for them, but maybe they can figure something out. Either way, there's still a very highly watched program with Deion Sanders at the helm. So there's a lot going on here. And I think the only add that they're going to make is bringing SMU over from the remnants of the ACC. And this becomes kind of like an old, maybe like the teams that weren't wanted for the Big 12 from the Big 8 and the Southwest Conference, when you get SMU over here to join TCU and Houston and Baylor and Texas Tech, these teams from the Southwest Conference. Of course, you have the teams that are already from the Big 8. And then you have this kind of mountain side of things with BYU, with Utah, and then I guess in the same line, not in the mountain, but in the same line, you have Arizona and Arizona State. I really think that this program, or this conference, is super interesting if they do this. If they lose the Cincinnati's, the West Virginia, the UCF, the kind of eastern side of their conference, they become much more streamlined and led by Texas Tech. I think in this scenario are obviously the third best conference in the country. And I think that it's like there's nothing above or below that's anywhere close to what they have there. The Big 12 really has turned into something great. I think that BYU and Utah were such great gets. Arizona and Arizona State were such great gets for the Big 12 when they really did not have much. They were going to be probably more of a G5 conference. And I think over these past 2 college football seasons, you've seen that with the additions from the Pac-12 and BYU and then Texas Tech's ascension, they can be a college football power. And that's not to mention what they are in basketball with Houston and Kansas and Arizona. There's something special in the Big 12, and I really think that that's the conference that if you're not the Big 10 or you're not the SEC, this is the conference you want to be in. And I think that the invitations are going to be kind of exclusive. I don't think that when Brett Yormark says we want to be aggressive in expansion, I don't think that that is the idea for a Big 12. I think the Big 12 should stay streamlined, stay centered around the Texas Tech, BYU, Utah, Arizona State thing they have going on, and just hope that they can get some of these other fringe programs like Iowa State, like Baylor, like Colorado, like Oklahoma State to be successful on some seasons. And they're going to be what you want to be as the third conference in college football in the 2020s, in the 2030s, and beyond. But thanks for watching that video. Make sure that you like and subscribe and hype the video. It helps small content creators. I'm a small content creator, and I could use all the help I could get. If you made it this far, leave a comment and let me know what you think. What do you think about the old Big East kind of conference? Is there a better name for it that you have? And what do you think of that kind of conference kind of being put together by a media partner? How many teams do you think could survive as an independent, and are we going to see some kind of independent revolution? And what's the best conference outside of the Big 10 and the SEC in this particular setup? If you want to watch more of my videos, I do have this for you. Over here, I got the video that I did yesterday, which is kind of about where the ACC is as a conference and where to go from here. Up here, I've got a video that I did last week, which is about the rise and fall of Conference USA. Check that one out if you haven't seen it yet. I got my subscribe link on this side here, and if you love Bucky Barracks and you can't get enough, I've got more Bucky Barracks right on top. Other than that, we'll check you next time. See ya!